Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on June the 14th, 2015. You know, sometimes you have to sit back and think and analyze your feelings and what you feel. And by that I mean what you sense is happening in the world, because as people in all ages have noticed, at least some of them, you can get a kind of hush all over the world, as the old song goes. It's a feeling it's in the air. I think H.G. Wells mentioned it about World War I when he said that prior to it breaking out, everyone kind of knew it was coming. It was in the air, so to speak. And because we're like rats in a cage, getting all the media dished out to us what to believe, that gives you your whole reality of things and gives you your opinions and everything else. Rats never suspect they're being totally managed by whatever information, disinformation, lies or fiction they're given. In fact, they're never given the whole truth on anything their entire lives long. And that's a truth. Whereas education of history or whatever is always rewritten down the road. Always. Or as George Orwell said, the memory hole. Truth goes down the memory hole when it causes problems or points out different people behind scams that have happened in the past, or the present for that matter. The media is awfully good today because they pretty well omit things that are happening in the present and to protect those at the top. And those who get to the top in this system have always been psychopathic in nature. And a psychopath isn't just someone you see running around with a knife stabbing folk inside the shower curtains like you saw in Psycho. The psychopaths are out for themselves, basically. They have a craving for power, a craving for the good life, for being worshipped by people. They need applause. They have tremendous egos because they are pure ego, in fact. A psychopath can rationalize anything they do, anything at all, no matter how absurd it appears when they're talking about what they did. When they're in court, the lower levels that end up in court, they'll always say that the victim asked them to rape them or murder them or something. It's just incredible. And yet they're not classified, you see, as psychotic. They have no break with reality. They simply change reality inside their own head to always rationalize whatever they've done. It's a simple trick, and you'll never find a psychopath ever admitting that they were at fault with anything. In fact, they think those who have morals and those who feel compassion for others are strange. They understand they live amongst people who have these things because they study people all their lives. Growing up, it's an instinctive thing, like a shark looking for prey. They look for what they see as weak spots, the chinks in the armor, to get in and manipulate people for their own benefit, the psychopath's personal benefit. They're fantastic at using people. They're great persuaders, fantastic persuaders to get other people to do their bidding for them. And that's basically the MO of the successful psychopath, as it's called in today's language or terminology, because they've got to the top. But they get to the top through all conniving means possible, cutthroat techniques, backstabbing, and they get up there. And they can stop at nothing at all. They will stop at nothing if they think they can possibly get away with it to get to the top. Morals are for the people they don't understand, the people out there, the masses. So the masses live in a psychopathic system. And psychopaths can employ lots of non-psychopaths even, such as journalists and so on, to write the news, to indoctrinate the people who must remain gullible and naive at the bottom level in order to be used. That's what nations really are for. And the technique of using money is the enabler of the psychopath. Without money, a monetary system, he couldn't exist. Would still be living in little tribes and villages and so on. And he'd be spotted so fast and early because he'd want more of a share of the grain or the produce of the people for his own survival. He'd get caught eventually and probably stuffed into a peat bog, as he did in Europe, with his belly full of grain that he'd stolen from the communal granary. That was to get him through the winter. That's the psychopath. Today, of course, they have all the protections and they can get up there in a monetary system. And once they gain money, which is quite easy for the psychopath, the intelligent psychopath, he can then hire his own thugs, basically, to protect him. If he's in charge of countries, he's got armies to protect him. And the gullible naive that support him and don't know they're even supporting a psychopath pay for it all, of course. There's a monetary system through taxation. That's the reality of the world. You must always create a society, as I say, of incredibly naive and dumbed down people. Yet they're taught to trust and believe in superior people managing their lives. They're taught, it's drummed into them through many different avenues. Jacques Ellul was awfully good, the philosopher who wrote about propaganda and how it's used to manipulate the masses and indoctrinate them through their educational system and so much their fictional systems of entertainment, where the cops are always the good guys and detectives can't sleep at night until they hunt down this bad man who's done something really awful, and so on. So same with hospitals too. Especially in America, they've been brainwashed for years with different TV series on doctor dramas and so on. And you find that the doctors are the same. They're in there to help people. You ever hear about the folk getting bankrupted, trying to pay off bills and things for extortionate prices for things? But it's all propaganda. It's like charity that's always got the face of there to help, and they're the biggest scammers on the planet. See, psychopaths live in scams. Scams can be legitimized like charities, and they can be legitimized as governments even, where gangs of psychopathic types can work together for each other's benefit at the top, as long as they can get good shares of the loot and divide it up properly, you see. The psychopath also worships the person above him, a higher psychopath with more power. They grovel, in fact, and they rant and rave and scream at the person just beneath them. They love this rank system. Therefore, they can get off with literally murder or even mass murder. And I don't care what you are told to fixate your brain on with mass murder in history. The fact is it's going on all the time, with armies getting sent abroad under fictions, basically, for the causes of it all. Pre-planned wars to grab resources for the top psychopathic groups with their psychopathic companies and CEOs and all the rest of it. That's the system we live in. Most folk will never wake up to this. They can't, because it's been drummed into you to be utterly naive and trusting through all your brainwashing. It goes on all your life, as I say, mainly through fiction, total brainwashing. Then you judge people by what you would do. Well, I wouldn't do that. Oh, they couldn't have done that. That's how you judge people. You can't judge a psychopath using your own standards, because they have no emotions as such as you know them. They have emotions such as lust and greed and all the rest of it, and they can laugh and all the rest of it. They can feel that and happiness, but they can't feel remorse or guilt or anything like that. It's not part of their makeup. Now it's been made trendy, apparently, with television series and, again, fictional dramas and soaps, basically, on top psychopaths and how they get away with everything. And you were taught to emulate them, actually. And it's quite easy to emulate them when you live in a psychopathic culture, because, you see, when psychopaths rule, they create the culture designed to suit them for the rest of the people to follow. Therefore, you end up worshipping the most wealthy people on the planet. The old idea of the serf doffing the hat and bowing when he sees power and wealth walk and pass him by is still in action today. And it's drummed up through the media with fanfare and photo ops and so on. So when you live in a psychopathic culture, you truly are a slave. Because you're taught as a bottom slave to simply work hard in your simple, naive, simplistic way, and you'll get rewards for it in life. It doesn't happen like that at all. Never has happened like that at all. They had little breaks in history, mainly from between World War II to about 1970 in the US primarily, where little folk could afford their own houses for the first time. They bought them cheap. The dollar was worth some cash. They could save up. You can put their children to school. In fact, working people could do that. And then they started taking it away from the late 70s onwards. Till today, everybody's got their hand out to the government as a proper serf should. And nothing changes. The feudal system has always been here. Everything is feudal. You understand? Carroll Quigley said that about the whole coterie that run the world and envisage the future and plan the future. And men of vision, they call the boys at the top, the ones who plan it all in the inner circle, the wealthiest people on the planet, who come from very old wealthy families. If you control money in this system, money is the enabler of the psychopath, you see. Without money, you can't do anything. You can't hire thugs because they go home if you get no reward out of it. So they need a monetary system. You can't hire armies and tell them to go off and plunder for you, for your corporations, without money. So money is the enabler of the whole system. This is made to appear normal, and they call it progress, of course. And so if you didn't have this system, you'd be way beyond the dark ages. You'd be living in little villages and huts and things. Well, what's wrong with that? You would have to get a nonsense indoctrination in school about lists of generals and so on down through history that won battles and all that rubbish that you waste your time on in school. Completely irrelevant, and a lot of it's fictional anyway. At least the causes of it all in the wars are fictional. But the fact is, we're given so much garbage to fill our heads with to make sure indoctrination takes properly upon us with the education we've got. Then the carrots put out to you to follow. And if you just keep running fast in life and paying off debts and borrowing money and paying off debts and paying your taxes and working, then somehow one day you can sit back and breathe a sigh of relief and say, well, now I can take it easy and enjoy myself and do the things I want to do. And it never happens. But it keeps going. The myth keeps going. You see. Now, psychopaths, when they work with cabals and groups of other psychopaths, are given the basic rules to follow. And they know if they follow the rules and don't bring shame upon their own particular community or group or cabal, then they'll be well rewarded. So they can do what they want, just don't get caught in it, basically. And a good example of a psychopath is this man here, Dominique Strauss-Kahn. How many of you remember that one? It was all over the news a few years ago there, where he was in New York, visiting New York, the head of the IMF, of course, at the time, this guy. The IMF, again, was created by the psychopathic coterie that created the World Bank and the Bank for International Settlements, the free trade agreements, and so on. And they planned it over 100 years ago, well written about by those who were their own historians. And I've mentioned that so many times. So, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, it says, the former head of the International Monetary Fund has been cleared by a French court of aggravated pimping. A completely reduced crime to start with, aggravated pimping, from what he actually was involved in. It says the one-time French presidential hopeful who was described seeking recreation from the stress of world politics, what a joke that is, eh? By having rough sex. This is really toned down, by the way, for the English language. Rough sex with strangers at orgies in Europe and the US was found not to have promoted or profited from the prostitution of 7 women. Though there's only 7 women came forward, been doing it all his life. The judges said Strauss-Kahn was not the instigator of the orgies with prostitutes. That's a legality there, you see. The reason it took so many years to get him to trial is so that they can either bribe and pay off claimants, you see, and also offer big bribes to judges and things too, to go in the right direction to clear this guy, you see. Because you see, you're offered these protections when you're brought into the higher psychopathic group, and you are a psychopath yourself. It says throughout his trial he maintained he didn't know that some of the women brought to him by businessmen friends at group sex sessions were prostitutes. This is a guy who loved to boast how intelligent he was, right? He didn't know that these women were just brought to him by businessmen friends at group sex sessions. Didn't know they were prostitutes. Saying he thought they were merely swingers like himself. You see? The businessman told the women not to say they had been paid. So he's paid them off, you see, or his backers have, to say that, yeah, they were the guys that really did the pimping, so they're not charged with it. See, he is, you see. Strauss-Kahn's lawyer, Henry Leclerc, said the case against him had been totally empty, accusing investigating magistrates of a moral crusade with no legal foundation. The wide-reaching trial in the northern French city of Lille revealed a saga of money, fame, and women traveling to luxury locations for sex with powerful men against a backdrop of economic deprivation and social misery. And it says, known as the Carlton Affair, this is the one that brought it to the investigative surface. The case began in 2011. 2011 it started, right? As an investigation into an alleged prostitution network at Lille Hotel Carlton, where women described as livestock, this is what they called the prostitutes, livestock or dossiers, had been offered up as a dessert course at business lunches. Strauss-Kahn was never involved in any alleged activity at the hotel, but when his name was mentioned by sex workers in interviews with investigators, the inquiry was widened. 13 other men appeared in court on pimping charges, many with no connection to Strauss-Kahn, but the high-profile coverage of the case centered on the former IMF chief and how he sought to wind down from managing the fallout from the global financial crisis. I mean, that's what had him under stress. You know, these crooks at the top, it's not in them to worry or have stress. Psychopaths actually are pretty stress-free. They can't handle stress, so they don't have it. Because they feel no guilt anyway, or worry. This is by having sex with strangers brought to him at orgies by businessmen keen to curry favour. Now, the International Monetary Fund, again, was set up by the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the private club that planned the future. And they used to be called the Lord Alfred Milner Group before they were called the Royal Institute for International Affairs. And then they also have branches across the whole planet. In the US, they're called CFR. I've mentioned that so many times. But the IMF, you see, when you sign on to the United Nations, which was set up by these particular businessmen a long time ago, these big bankers in London, every country signed on to the United Nations to support an organization and put money into it from each country, which would be loaned out supposedly to third world countries and also given out in grants to start businesses up in their own countries. So it sounds awfully altruistic, almost like a charity, but it's not a charity at all. Because the deal is, you see, that they borrow money from the countries, because your country's acting like a banker. That's where your country really is, a big banker at the top. And he loans out money to these third world nations through international agreements that they put into. By the way, the whole free trade agreements, all of them, say that emerging countries can get special benefits with loans and all the rest of it too. And they can also pollute as long as they want and then get renewed after 15 years. So they don't have to follow all the different global agreements that get put onto them. Plus, the countries that are first world countries have to pay them to build hospitals and stuff. So you get them all for free, hospitals, and even build up their military and all the rest of it. And you, again, your country, will give them these big grants, which go to international monetary, go through the IMF to big international corporations that then set up factories in those third world countries to get the dirt cheap labour, plus they get the factory for free and you pay for it. So any loans that go through the IMF, you see the country that gives out the loan has to pay off the debt. You're the guarantor at the bottom. And that's what your country does. They put you down as a guarantor for these third world countries that can never pay them off. They know that through compound interest and so on. Anyway, it's a very powerful position. In fact, Strauss-Kahn was the sixth most influential and powerful Jew in the world, according to the Jerusalem Post a few years ago. The sixth most powerful one. So that was a powerful position to have all this massive fund from all these different countries at your disposal to put into all the top corporations. And believe you me, Strauss-Kahn, like all the rest of them, are well rewarded by lobbyists that come to them all the time from big corporations to get these basically free grants and loans put out to them, basically. It's quite something else. That's the world as it really is, folks. Stop being naive. Anyway, it says, the trial exposed not only Strauss-Kahn's secret double life, but also the harrowing accounts of some of the women with whom he had sex. Now, it also came out in New York that he grabbed some hotel worker as well and tried to rape her. But it says here, between 2009 and 2011, the years covered by the trial, Strauss-Kahn held the most senior economic job in the world in Washington, and he was convinced he would become the next socialist president of France. Came from a very wealthy family. And they all want to be socialists, these wealthy ones. You notice that? Why do you think that is? See, they believe in an ordered, controlled society where they can really fleece the serfs at will, basically, and but manage their lives properly, because the serfs can't manage their lives properly. They need government agencies, which they pay for too through their taxes and everything else. They pay for everything through their taxes. In fact, they pay for all the loans that Strauss-Kahn dishes out all over the place. Anyway, he invited TV crews to document his cozy and high-profile marriage to Anne Sinclair, an influential French journalist and feminist who's since divorced him. During his working day, however, he would send text messages asking a businessman friend to join him at a magnificent swingers club in Madrid and bring him some equipment, a term he admitted meant women. Women are equipment, you see. To a psychopath. While in Brussels for IMF meetings, he'd be driven to the countryside at night for group sex with strangers on mattresses on the floor of a swingers club. Throughout the trial, he said he never knew or suspected this bright guy, this psychopath who's awfully streetwise, never knew, because all psychopaths are incredibly streetwise, they catch on to anything right away. He didn't know or suspect that there were prostitutes among many women brought to him at sessions. The trial was marked by the tearful accounts of two destitute and vulnerable prostitutes who were among the women brought to locations in Paris, Brussels, and Washington to have sex with them. They likened the orgies to slaughter. Now listen to the terminology here, because it's much, much more graphic in the French. But in English, they say, likened the orgies to slaughter, killing, and butchery. What is that picture in your mind? How does that picture in your mind? Slaughter, killing, and butchery. It's like snuff, isn't it? Isn't it? But it's really toned down for the English, you see. And apart from that, he's been cleared, you see. He didn't know. He's a poor victim of all this thing. You understand? So now he can go after anybody who accuses or says what really went on. So they're toning it down in English language. The former IMF chief told the trial that he had regrettably discovered during the court hearings he had a sexuality that was rougher than the average man, but that he believed no means no. So he found out, you see, because of the court hearings, that the way he had sex was rougher than the average man. I mean, here he is going to these orgies where he was rough all the time, and he'd obviously see the other guys having their sex and so on. But he didn't compare himself. He's a poor, innocent victim, this guy. Just so naive. It says, anyway, he did anal sex and all the rest of it, even when they said no, blah, blah, blah. This is the toned-down version. Asked by the judge whether he had noticed this woman crying and all that, Strauss-Kahn said, no, I would have found it chilling. He said he did not have a precise memory of the woman, but that he had no sense of refusal. And so in other words, he's been coached by his lawyer to say all the right things that normal folk expect to hear. When no means no, it means no, etc. And the prostitutes were never asked their name or anything. And there was no conversation between them. They were just there like tools. You'd use a tool and that's and throw it away. And that's what they did. So the basic thing is the guy got off with it, naturally. is too wealthy to put inside. And apart from that, I'm sure they went to an awful lot of work to cover all the other influential people that were with them, etc., etc., etc. Because that's normal up there. If you think Nero and Caligula and all these guys were really kinky and weird and disgusting, you understand it's only through your indoctrination that you think it ever stopped. It's gone on down through history with the psychopathic elites. Always. They have a completely different view of the reality in the world than you do. And so anyway, he's got off with it, etc., etc. But that's normal, as I say. And these are the respectable people that are put out in front of you to run the Bank for International Settlements and the IMF and etc., etc. They can get up there and pose in front of the cameras like Mussolini with their chins up and look down on the little people. And even look so sincere when they want to. Psychopaths are awfully convincing. They really are. They're fantastic at convincing people of anything. That's why they're so successful. They're the most highly manipulative species on the planet. So that's what runs your world, folks. It hasn't stopped with him. It's still going on. And you'll find they're all like that at the top. And they always have been. Behind the suits and ties and the manicured nails and all the rest of it. That's what they are. That's what you've got running you and the world. And it's always been like that. Always been like that. So wake up. Wake up and just, see how things really are. See, normal folk live in hope. And they simply hope things will always get better. It never does, but they hope things will get better. But they don't. They get worse and worse as the elites get richer. The techniques that they use are much better managed by all the little minions beneath them through their think tanks and behaviorists and psychologists and neuroscientists that manage all of us. And those in academia that brainwash us and are well rewarded for doing so. So that's a system you really live in, and folk can never break through. They still think that if you get the right person in politics, it'll all change. Now, here's a little thing for the naive. If you truly, by some miracle, in a totally corrupt system, the right person could ever get into politics, he'd be assassinated so fast, or come down with a fatal disease so quickly, it'd be like a blip in the screen, you see. And in his time, he'd be so transient. So, you got to stop looking for this answer for things. It won't come from the top. And the existing institutions are just that. They're institutions set up by monetary system, which is at the very, very top of all of this. It's the enabler for the psychopaths to use down through history and down through the ages. You control the money system, and you control everything underneath it that accepts it. And the whole world's running on this monetary system. Monetary systems enable psychopathy protection through owning countries called governments, by governments, and they have massive armies at their disposal paid by the taxpayer at the bottom, again through money. If you didn't have money, you couldn't keep an army together. They'd say, I'm fed up, I'm going home. That's the key to it all. So we're left at the bottom like rats in a cage, saying, who's going to come in this morning first? And then comes a guy with a white coat. Oh, it's so-and-so. What's so-and-so going to do to us today? And then they'll chat amongst themselves. Is he going to put electrodes in their brain? Is he going to shock us? Is he going to inject something? What's he going to do? That's where we are at the bottom, sitting like little rats, chattering about what they're going to do to us next. You see? That's how the whole system works. And it's kept that way by the media. It tells you what to worry about. It keeps you a constant state of fear and trepidation. You're given no safety whatsoever in this system. Even though you're told to just work hard and one day you'll be okay. They're bankrupting countries left, right and centre over and over again. They're always plundering you and taking the wealth away. And they won't change it because they own the system. They want to do it again and again and again. That's why they won't change it. But they still keep the same system in for you. Just keep work hard and one day you'll be okay. It doesn't happen. And more so today than ever before. As I say, a brief period in the US, and probably the only in the US, between 1945 and 1970, mid-70s or so. They took it away. Through their agreements, trade agreements, and special nation status stuff and so on. They didn't have to pay taxes. Remember too, for all these free trade agreements, all the export or import taxes that countries used to live on at one time, even before an income tax, that paid for everything. You do away with all the import duties coming into your country to be sold. And they're going to make up the difference somewhere. Guess where it comes from? All of you, the taxpayer. So we're left with a little, as I say, rats in a cage, and here we are waiting for the media to tell us what's going on. The media is not investigative media anymore. They used to lead the charge at one time. Occasionally, once in a while, you'd have an occasional newspaper trying to lead the charge on something. It doesn't happen today, though. To demand to know, the public's right to know, what secret agreements have been made because they should not be secret in the first place. Things like that doesn't happen now. In fact, they don't even send reporters out and things anymore, most papers. They look at Reuters and AP, and that's about it. They all copy the same stuff to make sure that all indoctrination, fantasy called media is standardized. So across the world we're getting the same nonsense at the same time, and we think we're well informed. Double think, eh? Oh, it's secret, but we're well informed. It's going to affect all our lives, but we're well informed. But we don't know why it's going to affect our lives because they won't tell us. Here's an article here. Technology money policies must line up to fulfill the G7 vision of shift away from fossil fuels. Now, I've mentioned before, the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, is tied in completely with the G7 and so on. It's all the one group at the top that runs them all, by the way. And it's tied in with how to get everything away from you that you think that you own, or your rights even, and so on, and manage people from birth to death. That's so important. Even right down to giving you your role for life, what you're going to work at, and so on. School to work. It was copied from the Soviet system, and is implemented in the West now too in some places, and going even further. But this is the next step for it as well. You don't get a choice in what you want to do when you leave school. You'll be trained simply for one thing, and that'll be it. You won't get any other education at all. No education in logic or anything like that. It's so important not to give you that. Anyway, it says when leaders of the group of 7 wealthy countries pledged to decarbonize the global economy, they're talking about a shift so dramatic that one analyst described it as a new Apollo mission. Like putting a man on the moon, it would require overcoming major hurdles related to technology and money and the political will so far in short supply to make it happen. You're going to pay everything that you've got that's not used for food and rent in taxes, in energy taxes, carbon taxes. I kept saying this for years. What do you think austerity means, that the plan for austerity? It means you won't have anything left over for anything else. It says, despite gains by renewable energy sources in recent years, the world is still hooked in fossil fuels, yada, yada, yada. And then they're going about the heat trapping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which plants need to grow and live, and the plants give off oxygen from the CO2. Everything is nonsense. It's a con to get total control over the world, all of its resources, and to get control over every single one of you and your complete and utter trained behavior that you'll have at the end of it. A new training from birth to death, running your life from birth to death. That's what it's all about, folks. Because cons are always used on big scales, massive scales. They've got to be big scales because then folk can't believe that such a big con could exist, because they wouldn't pull such a big con. Normal folk couldn't think of that. That's how you judge your sanity. Well, I couldn't do that, therefore they couldn't. Psychopaths do everything like that all the time. They're born chronologists, specialists in it, experts in it. Anyway, this is what President Barack Obama and other G7 leaders envisioned in Germany on Monday, is a world where those emissions would be phased out by the end of the century. I guess so that none of us will exist because we can't breathe the stuff out, you see. Or if we do, no, but we'll pay for it. You'll pay for your breathing out, for existing. It's an existence tax you're going to get. So above all, that would entail a major shift in how the world produces electricity. So you get massive cutbacks and so on. About 2/3 of which comes from the burning of fossil fuels, mainly coal and gas. Now, solar and wind ain't going to give you the kind of power you got now for everyone. So there's definitely going to be rationing and so on. And even the rationing of it all will be so expensive to use any of it that the big companies aren't going to lose anything at all. They're going to get more money for producing less, you see. That's one article for the people stuck in the laboratory, in their little cages, saying, what are they doing to us next? What are they going to do? And then had the G7 leaders wrap up summit with pledges and warnings and all the rest of it. And again, government only exists because they've always got external threats, so they claim to, you see. In the past, when it was kings and queens, they'd often have agreements between cousins who were often, generally the kings and queens from different countries, but they're all cousins. And they'd agree, if the folk were getting restless and bitching about getting taxed and so on, they'd say, well, let's have a war or the threat of a war. Because the first thing people do in a tribal situation, and a nation's a big tribe, that's your instincts are still working as a tribal system, even what you think is a nation. And you turn towards the leaders to save you and protect you. What we're going to do. So it keeps government going. Ukraine crisis, global security threats, climate change, and Greek economy dominated a 2-day meeting in Bavarian Alps, it says. And again, they're warning that Russia, it could be war with Russia, and stuff like that, and going to step up sanctions against Russia. Russia still is signed into the EU agreement, hasn't withdrawn all from it. And, but again, it gets the war drums stirred for the public to be fearful of, you see. During the Cold War, it was a fantastic period for the boys at the top, because it justified them taxing the blazes out of people to keep them safe for new weapons and missiles and anti-missile missiles and et cetera, et cetera. This nonsense that they went on for years, getting money for nothing. It was fantastic for them. And a lot of them regret it, you see. But all the research and development and all the rest of it all came out of the Cold War. All the stuff that's used to spy on you today, which helps the governments have complete control of you, because they know exactly what you're thinking, chatting about, and all the rest of it on a daily basis. All came out of the Cold War. The Cold War was a complete fake. They always need an enemy. And also mentions Harper, the Prime Minister of Canada, says he met European Council President Donald Tusk and European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, where he was expected to push a deal through. He says Harper said nothing about the trade deal going into the meeting and did not meet with the travelling Canadian media on the first day of the summit, holding 2 photo ops and so on. And Canada and the EU have an agreement in principle on a sweeping pact in goods and services, but the legal text still needs to be finished so it can be ratified by Canada and the EU's 28 member countries. What is Canada used in this context? The folk in Canada don't get a single vote or say in the matter. It's secret. What's in this agreement is totally secret from Canadians. Same in America. Same everywhere else. And the EU member, the Trans-Pacific Partnership one, and also the EU one, the Transatlantic Partnership, it's all secret. And it's to be kept secret 5 years after. At least minimum 5 years after. That can be renewed for another 5 years, as long as they want to. But 5 years after it, they get it through. And it says Canada and the EU have an agreement in principle on Sweden Act and so on in goods and services, because now they're going to the services labour market, I should say, not just goods. And it says ratifying the pact known as CETA, C-E-T-A, would be a major political win for Harper with the planned October 19 federal election looming. A political win for Harper? From whom? The only ones who want it are the big international corporations. They probably don't even know what's happening or what it is. Lots of them don't know, never heard of it. You see, if you mention it, what are you talking about? It's not mentioned in the media, about it. At least the media doesn't make a big deal about it. Heading into a meeting with the meeting and so on, Harper said nothing about the pact, but his office said prior to the summit that the Prime Minister would be using all his meetings with European leaders to push for it. And the United stance on Russia and all the rest of it. And this other article here, it says here, the G7 communique seeks 70% reduction in carbon emissions by 2050, 100% by 2100, and it says, browsing the 44-item G7 wish list, right? It says G7 communiques come and go. It's all much ado about nothing, because nothing is ever done, it says. There are 44 items from the Leaders' Declaration for the G7 Summit, June 7th to 8th wish list, it says. 1. Take concrete action to address global warming. Eliminate 40 to 7% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Decarbonisation of the global economy over the course of this century. Spend $100 billion a year on low-carbon strategies. It's a great money-for-nothing strategy right there for the boys who get in it and get all the grants. Start a carbon early warning system for non-compliance in small islands, developing states, Africa, Asia and Pacific, Latin America and the Caribbean. What we've got here is a system of slavery by one system, one group across the entire planet. But that was designed 100 years ago with the Royal Institute for International Affairs, when it was called the Lord Alfred Milner Group in the inner circle. All the free trade, all this stuff, and all these pacts were written up back then. But they do, their whole agenda. Accelerate access to renewable energy in Africa. Reaffirm ambition to make the Green Climate Fund fully operational in 2015. Now, the Green Climate Fund is your, again, taxation, folks. Phase down hydrofluorocarbons. It says 9, praise the Hamburg Initiative for sustainable energy security. Sustainable energy, folks. They also want a sustainable society. That's depopulation. That's not in here, but that's apart from other things I've read in other particular articles. Build on the Kobe 3R action plan for resource efficiency. Protect the marine environment in conjunction with International Seabed Authority. Imagine the cost of that. You're as well as giving your whole paycheck to government. And eventually that'll come to that, by the way. And they'll manage you and give you your ration of food and stuff. That will happen. I'm not kidding you. That's what the planned society is all about. Planned and managed society. And it goes on and on about the Millennium Development Goals, which is also Agenda 21 that goes into its next phase. And so on and so on, all the usual stuff, but which you think are left-wing, but actually are totalitarian control mechanisms for those who already own the monetary system. And everything underneath it, which everything else is. Now, once in a while, again, they give you a little red herring to follow, and that's that Britain is going to get a vote eventually to pull out of the EU. And of course, they were all figured out in advance that it'll never happen because, you see, a good proportion of those living in Britain today are not British at all. And they come from a lot of these other countries that are amalgamated across Europe and elsewhere. And elsewhere is the key to all. Even those from India have relatives all over the EU, and that's how they do business amongst each other. That's how particular groups survive so well. and do so well. They can get all the resources amongst each other and pass it on, and much cheaper than anybody else can compete with them. So it says Britain could lose its European Union veto on some issues as compensation for the concessions. Prime Minister David Cameron has demanded, a senior German member of the European Parliament has said. Manfred Weber, centre-right leader, whatever that means, of the largest political grouping in the European Parliament, said Britain could lose its prize veto if it opts out of the commitment to an ever closer union. Now, how close can you get, folks? That term ever closer means your nation is gone. It always did mean that, ever closer. That's how they used to couch it when they were doing it's just trade treaties, that's all, years ago, before they created the European Union Parliament or anything like that. And the Prime Ministers were always going off to sign into closer ties. I thought, well, how close can you get to? You're getting strangled already with this noose around your neck. But this is the terminal. Everything's to con the public. So you'd say, it's just a little trade thing, stuff like that. And here you are. You're now subservient to this monolith, this massive monolith of the EU Parliament. It's only a corrupt system, naturally, because it's out for the psychopaths who run it. Anyway, so a recent survey by the US think tank, meanwhile, found that 55% of Britain's support remaining in the EU. Well, that's probably the 55% that weren't born there in the first place, as opposed to 36% who want the UK to leave. Britain's finished anyway. It's finished now. Its culture's gone. God knows what they can really see the culture is now. All of its moral standing, which gave it a pretty safe society, is finished with the gangs and the rapists and all the rest of that have come into the country from all over the world. It's finished. Anyway, it says Cameron met with several European leaders, including Weber, last week in a 2-day charm offensive on the continent in a bid to gain support for his demands and so on. He wants several concessions from the EU counterparts before the UK holds a popular vote on membership of the EU by the end of 2017. Cameron wants the power to stop unemployed European migrants from claiming benefits in the UK. That's about 30-odd years too late. A move he hopes will appease hardline Eurosceptics and the Conservative Party and UK Independence Party. PM also wants special protections in EU law for Britain's financial industry. Now, Cameron doesn't want to pull out of it, naturally, because he's been put in by the big boys themselves. They're all put in at the top. It doesn't matter what party they are, they all belong to the one party at the top. That's why they're put in there at the top. But it appears to be the top of their countries. And it's all over. It's finished, you see. Way too late. Anything they promise could be done is way too late anyway. Way too late. It's finished. That was the intention. And as he's demanding that and getting cheers from people by demanding things from the EU Parliament, here's another article giving his doublespeak. David Cameron has given his clearest warning that he will sack any government minister, as one of his politicians, who wants to campaign to quit the European Union, insisting the government will not be neutral once he has struck a deal on a new relationship with the EU. Right? So there's your politicians for you. We're getting managed, understand. He only does what he's told to do by, the psychologists, behaviourists, and all the big think tanks that are employed by the masters of the world to give out to their people. The appearance of things, public relations, propaganda. So it is. That's how you manage the people. And after all, the US's stance and clamouring against Russia about over the Ukraine and so on. Now, Russia's always seen the Ukraine as part of it's basically its own satrapy, if you like a satellite of it. It's part of it. That's how they've always seen it. But here's the West saying, that's terrible what you're doing now, Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. It's all hypocrisy and nonsense. And psychopaths have no problem not being reasonable, because what they demand is always unreasonable. Here's what the West is up to. I mean, look what they allowed to happen, for instance, under the EU with Greece. in Italy, and even appoint guys to lead the country. They appoint, see, they've done away with the politicians at the top, which is probably cheaper, but they just simply appoint technocrats now to run the countries, which is always the thing that the Royal Institute of International Affairs said they would do when they achieved these big trading groups and owned them across the world. Here's what the US is doing as they do all the grandstanding against Russia and Ukraine. The island of Puerto Rico is caught in an economic crisis. While the rest of the US is seeking economic growth, Puerto Rico is struggling to emerge from 9 years of recession. The poor economy has spurred hundreds of thousands to leave the island. The US territory, you see, that's what Russia would call Ukraine. The US territory is more than $72 billion in debt, running low in cash and on the verge of default. It's led many to call it the Greece of the Caribbean. Joseph Rosenblum, who directs municipal credit research and investment firm Alliance Bernstein, laughs when asked about the comparison. It's not long ago that California and its debt problems were being compared to Greece, he says. I guess the comparison is similar in the sense that it's a large amount of debt and there's no clear path to what the final resolution of the problems are. Rosenblum says, but there are some real differences between the two. It says, Michael Lipsky of Matlin Patterson Global Advisors, a hedge fund, says the biggest difference is that Puerto Rico is part of the US. So here's your thing. They're saying it's part of the US. Well, what is it? A satrapy? A satellite? A protectorate? All the fancy names lawyers in the past, because some lawyers have worked for the psychopaths too. A lot of the psychopaths are lawyers too, of course, naturally. But they can call it a satrapy or a satellite or a protectorate. They can call it what they want. They've done it all down through the ages. That's what they want to do to the whole world. But once they have you under their protection, or whatever they want to call themselves, then you're not allowed to pull out of it. They can't just go bankrupt even under American law. They can't go bankrupt. It says it's pretty clear the New York Federal Reserve is overseeing the liquidity situation for the island of Puerto Rico. So the private organization, the Federal Reserve and so on, is overseeing the liquidity situation for the island of Puerto Rico. And the fact that it's American laws that we're sitting down at the table and negotiating, the one key difference between Puerto Rico and the rest of the US territories is the territory. If you're a territory, you're prohibited from using bankruptcy to help restructure debts. That means it has to negotiate with investors. In other words, they have land for debt swaps and all your infrastructure and anything that's on it that's want or resort. They get it all for nothing. They own you. Look, you've lost your home, folk. All of the folk in Puerto Rico will lose their home, which is their little satrapy, nation, protectorate, whatever the legal term they want to use for it is. That's reality. And this is what you call living in a democracy. Double think, double think. Our brainwashing has been awfully, awfully good, don't you think? Fantastically good, hasn't it? They would live our whole lives with this rubbish getting fed to us, and yet as soon as the election time comes around and the national emblems and symbols come out and the terms and phrases are used that have been drummed into you, these guys they're walking about like gods and you're just bound down to them. All these psychopaths. It's fantastic, isn't it? Every country is the same. Every darn country is the same. Because you're living in a corrupt, international, psychopathic system that's simply consolidating its power over the whole planet and standardizing it for its own use, not for the people's. We're just like the tools that Strauss-Kahn ordered, basically. The accoutrements. That's what we are. That's what we are. And they're all the same. They're all the same. It doesn't matter who goes into it. It's a psychopathic type that has this desire for power and money and wealth and status. And they'll get it by any means possible. And they want to go into politics where you can get in and get up there. You see, understand? So they used to have the high psychopaths, that guys who already own the money system. That's it. They own it. They own the entire monetary system of the planet. That's how you get up there as a psychopath. That's why they take law to start with. Lawyers' jobs are to reinterpret law for their bosses, which are generally international corporations or wealthy clients. That's really what it is, you see. And you're given no choice, no matter as people at the bottom. They'll say, the nation of so-and-so has voted to... You don't even get votes to do anything. Or America's on board with... Have you been asked about anything? No. And even though the TPP Part 1 has been voted down over technicalities, they say, it's not what you think it is. Here it says here, President Barack Obama is scrambling to persuade almost 100 fellow Democrats to support a landmark trade bill, a centerpiece of his second-term agenda that most of them sought to block. In his weekly radio address, Obama called on Democrats in the House of Representatives to reconsider their votes, which on Friday stalled a sweeping agreement with Pacific Rim nations and came despite earlier appeals from the president. It says, I urge those members of Congress who voted against the trade adjustment assistance to reconsider it and stand up for American workers, Obama said on Saturday. Whatever the deal is with other countries, we want a better deal for American workers. In other words, this particular trade adjustment assistance is the only thing, supposedly, it's been used as a front by the other psychopaths that said no to it. That's all. So they can get approached by Obama's top boys and so on for higher positions and within the party, more wealth coming their way through different techniques and so on that are very, very common in their line of work, you might say, if you want to call it work. And that's what they hold out for. And once they get all the promises given to them individually and signed and delivered, then they'll all vote the proper way. The proper way being the way they're told to vote by their boss. That's all these holes. That's what holes have always been about. And so they're pretending it's to do with a better deal for American workers. They didn't give a darn about American workers or Canadian workers or anybody else's workers when they signed the big deals for China and free trade and all the rest of it too, or NAFTA, etc. They closed all the factories. They didn't give a darn. They knew it was all going to happen, but didn't give a damn. Psychopaths can't give a damn, you understand? It's not in their nature. They don't worry. There's nothing that a psychopath can do that keeps them awake at night. By worrying. It doesn't happen to them. And because you're normal, you can't imagine that. That's why it's so unreal to you. That's why you'll keep voting and voting in the same corrupt system. It's rather sad, isn't it? But that's the way it truly is. It's very, very sad. And that's about all the time I have, actually, at the moment, because it's an hour just flies by. And the only reason I'm reading all this rubbish that's fed to us all in the laboratory here, the rats in the laboratory, that's what we're dished out to us, is to explain things to you, how life really is. How it really is, folks. And don't blame me for saying how it really is. Don't kill the messenger. The whole idea is for you to start working on yourself. You're the only material you can be sure of. Rebuild on it. Rebuild on yourself. Come to understanding. If nothing else in this life, coming to understanding is a miracle in itself. Breaking through all of this. Of course, if enough folk did break through, something could probably be done down the road. But don't count on it, because most folk cannot break through. Indoctrination is too perfect today. Scientific indoctrination, they actually call it that. Bertrand Russell said that too. And he helped design the school system along with Dewey and other people to indoctrinate us. Number 2, you can buy the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And remember, if you're using the website, again, cuttingthroughthematrix.com, you'll see how to order them. You can pay by PayPal, by check, international money order even, or even cash. It's up to you. From Hamish, myself, from Ontario, Canada, this good night. May your God or your gods go with you.